despite life satisfaction remaining broadly static since 1973 when the statistics began, it's only much more recently that government has started to pay attention to it. And over that same time, it's worth bearing in mind that GDP per capita has roughly doubled, and that's even after you account for inflation. And this is the result, this particular chart for the UK, but you could go to any country in the developed world and get pretty much the same result. In most societies, you do find that the rich tend to be happier than the poor. However, increasing the wealth of the countries that are already well off generally only allows for a very small rise in happiness. There's almost no relationship, using World Values Survey data, between GDP per capita and happiness in countries where people earn more than $10,000. Part of this is because people adapt to rises in their income. And we all know what that's like. You get a pay rise, and that's great for the first couple of months, and then suddenly you seem to find yourself back where you started and not necessarily feeling any better off. And on a more extreme scale, the studies that look at lottery winners find that about months or years after they've won, they report that they are no happier than they were before. So it seems that this effect is a relative one. It's not about how much you have per se, but if you are richer than your neighbour, then you will report that you're happier. Unfortunately, that's not a particularly helpful finding for government, because that does create a zero-sum game. We cannot all be richer than our neighbours. I think what's important to bear in mind, though, is that measurement is really important, because what gets measured gets done. And that's as true in politics as it is in business. I think it's also important to recognise that this isn't about throwing GDP out the window as if it suddenly has no relevance whatsoever to our day-to-day lives or the wealth of our country. Of course, it will remain important, but this well-being set of indicators will be a complementary measure to be analysed alongside GDP. It will help us to properly evaluate government policy on the basis of what people really want. Is this improving our well-being, or is it having a negative impact? And because the data set is large, it will help us to really identify certain groups within society. Drilling down into the figures is going to be really important and exciting to find whether it's geographical groups, whether it's different genders, different ages, different socioeconomic groups having low levels of well-being, and what perhaps could be done to improve their situation. And it will also help us to discover more about the drivers of well-being. And of course, this has important implications for policymakers, but also could prove very important for business. So this is what exactly is going to be happening. We had the announcement just about a year ago that the Office for National Statistics would be measuring national well-being. Because this hasn't been done before, there's quite a process that goes on to make sure that we get that right. And Jill Matheson, the national statistician, has been driving this forward to make sure that we have a robust set of indicators. So in April, we actually started collecting data on 4 key subjective well-being questions, which ask a group of people basically how happy they were yesterday, how anxious they were yesterday. They also ask about life satisfaction and how meaningful overall people feel their life is. So we have the different elements of well-being, the immediate experience, but also from standing back and assessing how satisfied people are with their lives and how much they feel connected to the meaning and the worth within them. So that has already begun, but exactly how this was presented is being honed. And so in October, just a couple of months ago, the ONS published a more complete suite of indicators that will be used. Although rather than saying, this is it, that's it, no change, they are then consulting further on whether these are the right indicators and whether or not there need to be tweaks in some areas to those. Just last week, in fact, we had the first preliminary subjective wellbeing results from the opinions survey. And this was very much experimental in terms of how is this being presented, how can it be taken up and expressed by the media, and there's a lot of discussion about whether well-being should be expressed in a single number, 7.4 out of 10, whether it should be what percentage of individuals report well-being, say above 7 out of 10, or indeed whether we should also be focusing on the percentage of people who are reporting scores of 4 out of 10 or less, and therefore perhaps languishing in a certain degree of misery and worthy of our attention to deal with. So next month we will have the closure of that consultation on those specific set of indicators. And in the spring, the ONS will publish a summary of those views expressed in the consultation and how they're going to take that forward from there. The big date to be looking out for is next July, which is when we'll actually get the first full results of the large subjective wellbeing survey, and with the large data set that can be drilled down. But this is going to be an exciting time going forward, because throughout 2012, 2013, we will be publishing more data, and this will be an increasingly refined set of the wellbeing indicators as well. And of course, people always like trends. So rather than just a snapshot in time, being able to see what has changed from one quarter to the next, from one year to the next, is obviously going to be of great interest.